No, look, all I'm saying, what are dragons? Enormous reptiles, some of them fly, long tails, big claws, sharp teeth, right? What are dinosaurs? Hello everyone, it's Father Aaron. Welcome to the Dungeon Minister! We have left our heroes on a mountainside, in a cave, a man-made cave, specifically put there because the destination to which they are heading is so far removed that travelers needed a way station. The way station, a cave, the destination, Hrothgar's Eye. Okay, so what are Hrothgar's Eyes? From what our adventurers can see, it is some sort of fortress, some sort of watch post, some sort of outpost here in the mountains that overlooks this area from which Hrothgar, an ancient hero of the humans, Hrothgar could keep watch and defend the human kingdoms to the south. Our heroes have battled through a werewolf, yeti, a hill giant, and goblins to get this far. Now they are within sight, less than a day's travel away, and they're anxious to get started. Before they start, however, I should inform you, Fofire officially leveled up. She is now a 5th level thief. Way to go, Fofire. Crime pays. She, of course, joins Fleetwood and Bob Johnny, the 3rd level elves, and Touchberry, the 4th level halfling. Upon rising in the morning, after a difficult night, they didn't bring any firewood, so there was nothing to generate any heat in here, although they were at least out of the wind and under cover. Also, their sleep was disturbed every once in a while by the distant howling of a wolf. A dire wolf? A werewolf? At any rate, upon rising, the elves memorize their spells. Bob Johnny goes for his usual 2 magic missiles and then web as his 2nd level spell. And Fleetwood again goes with light and sleep and web. The cave where they have woken up overlooks a valley, the other side of which is Hrothgar's Eyes, the mountain on which this has been built. And the mountain that they are on connects over to Hrothgar's Eyes by a ridge of rock. It's a spur of the mountain that connects the two together, a shared ridge of rock. Now, Hrothgar's Eyes is on a mountain that is higher than the one they're on, and so although they're about halfway up their mountain, when it joins Hrothgar's Eyes, it's about 1/3 of the way up. So they make this journey. It is perilous. This ridge of rock is very narrow. There's a very narrow and slippery track at the top of it, and the wind comes howling through constantly. In fact, as they go along the path where the snow has been worn thin, where there's less ice cover, they start to see every once in a while holes in the rock. Worn, weathered, barely visible now, but clearly at some point holes were bored into here. These holes once held railings for some of the more difficult portions of this journey. By midday, they have reached the mountain on which Hrothgar's Eyes is built, and just as that ridge of rock meets the mountain and begins to sort of join the slope of that mountain and head upward into the rocky cliffs above, they can see that work has been done. Men or dwarves, eons ago, about 1,500 years to be specific, have carved a path, a ledge into the rock. Here the ledge is not natural, it is clearly hand carved, and it spirals around the mountain and heads up. I should note, these mountains are not Rocky Mountains, Alps in scale. They're a smaller mountain range. It's still impressive. They're still mountains, and you'd still really get hurt if you fell off of one, but they're not, the Himalayas or anything. Anyhow, they can see the path above corkscrewing up, and so they begin their climb up this path. It is hard going, and like the ridge, slippery, but like the ridge, in places they can see evidence that there was once railings here. This is clearly a well-traveled, trafficked route which was made safer, or at least an attempt was made to make it safer. They climb and they climb, and you know how it goes. Dungeons and Dragons, a game where a 3-hour walk takes 3 minutes and a 3-minute battle takes 3 hours. Anyhow, they reach a spot on the trail that is blocked by a structure. A gatehouse has been built here into the living rock on one side and coming out to the very edge of the cliff on the other. And where it reaches the cliff, the wall is rounded, affording no purchase. There is no way to sneak around the edge. In fact, if anything, since it was built, the mountain has eroded more and it is even less passable on that side. The gatehouse has a passage through it 3 feet wide, so it's not a large gate. It's just big enough for a man on a horse to go through. That's how tall it would be. But it is closed by a portcullis. Now, this portcullis is made of a shimmering metal, brilliant to look at, almost like silver. But when they go to approach it, they can tell it's not silver, it's harder. No, they try to lift it up. Something's preventing them from lifting it. It's got some sort of catch in it. They can't budge it at all. It is a very tough metal, and if it was 1,500 years old, it should be rusted away completely. And yet it bears the feel of antiquity. It doesn't feel like something new. Looking at the gatehouse itself, they can see that the stonework, too, looks ancient, and the stone is something they do not recognize. This stone will show up a number of places here. It is something quarried by dwarves in the very depths of the earth, a volcanic rock that is hardened to a state that surface rocks just don't attain. And so it's used by the dwarves in the building of great fortresses and strongholds and things like that. I don't have a name for this rock. I'm sure a geologist out there could suggest something, but in my world it's just superhardmium. Anyhow, parts of this structure, while the entire thing looks aged, it is clearly quite old, parts of the structure look like they've been repaired. Recent work, clean mortar lines, things that look like they were done very recently. Up along the top especially, where some of the crenellations had broken over the centuries, new work has been done. There is also on the second floor of this gatehouse, it appears to be 2 stories tall plus the top. On the second floor there is an arrow slit. They're wary of it for a little while, but nothing ever comes out of it, and so they stop worrying too much. They decide they're going to send the thief up the gatehouse. Climb walls, one of the thief's easiest tasks, and Fofire accomplishes it very simply. At this point, she's almost guaranteed to succeed. So up she goes like a fly on the wall, gets to the top, and instead of going in and opening the gate, she throws a rope down, because she doesn't know what she might run into downstairs. Wise bird. She throws the rope down for her companions, and they easily climb and surmount the gatehouse. The top of this structure is relatively plain. There are only a few interesting features. First of all, to their left, as they face in the direction they were traveling, the mountainside comes down, and it is a nearly sheer cliff. There's no climbing it here. There's no getting around it that way. It's simply too steep, and this gatehouse has truly been dug straight into the side of the mountain. Where the rounded protrusion sticks out on the ledge side of the gatehouse, there is an opening there in the crenellations so that perhaps an archer could come to fire on anyone at the gate. There's also a hole in the roof, about 3 feet by 2 feet, and in that hole they see the top of a ladder, made of the same strange metal. Around the edge of that hole there's a lip that suggests that a wooden door might have been framed and set in here at one point. And finally, across the gatehouse from that hole, there is a hole in the battlements. Where the crenellations come up between a couple of the raised bits, there's just a hole. And the snow is melted around it, and there's black char marks, soot marks around it, suggesting a chimney below. A chimney that has been recently used because the snow has melted. Well, down they go, down that ladder. They come down into a small room. It's about 7 feet by 13. Each square here, incidentally, is 1 foot. Snow has drifted in through the open hole in the roof and is piled around the base of the ladder. Directly next to the ladder is a staircase cut into the mountainside, cut into the living rock, a narrow, winding staircase which leads down. That staircase is separated from the room by a railing, again made of this durable, ancient material. Across from the ladder is a small fireplace, which explains the presence of the chimney at the top, although this does not look like it has been used. There are 2 arrow slits facing in either direction to either side of the gatehouse. And in the other end, there is a mechanism. On one wall, a large wheel with a chain partially wound around it. The chain which goes up to the ceiling and through a pulley, across the ceiling to another pulley, and down to the top of the portcullis. And there is a locking mechanism, a sort of lever which wrenches over and is now on top of the portcullis, keeping it closed. All of this, portcullis, chain, pulleys, wheel, all made of the same durable metal. I'm introducing Mithril into the game. Thank you, Professor Tolkien. If they had a dwarf here, the dwarf would be able to identify it, but in this world, as in Tolkien's world, Mithril is not common. It is very rare. You wouldn't necessarily know it when you saw it, especially if you didn't have a lot of experience in weapons and armor and ancient lore and things like that. Anyhow, again, they decide to leave the portcullis well alone, and they head down the stairs. Now, this is an important decision. They don't know it at the time, but it's an important decision. What order are they going to go in? Well, they decide to send the thief first. We're going to try for stealth. We're going to try for sneaking. Behind the thief, they will send Bob Johnny, which, if they thought about it, destroys all of their sneaking because he's wearing plate mail armor. Clang, bang, clang, right? Anyway, behind Bob Johnny comes Touchberry, and Fleetwood brings up the rear. Down this narrow staircase they go. They descend into a small room, 6 by 7. There is no light in this room save for a small crack of light around a door set in the one wall. That is all the illumination they have. They can barely see anything, having come from the relatively brightly lit room above with its 2 arrow slits and big hole in the roof. They can barely see anything, but they can hear something. A panting, heaving sound. It's coming from the corner. And as their eyes adjust, and as Bob Johnny gets below the level of the upstairs ceiling and can see in, he can see a creature hunched in the corner. It is hunched on a pile of cloth and animal skins and old rags and things like that. And it is a human for the moment. Touchberry has been busily lighting a lantern and hands it around Bob Johnny down to Fofire, who takes it and holds it up. And in its light, she sees the face of a man. His eyes are wild, his face sweating, and he convulses in the corner. And as she watches in horror, his face begins to mold and change and stretch. He is transforming. His fingers become longer and hooked. He is, of course, becoming a werewolf. These werewolves in this game, the characters don't know this, the werewolves in this game are not dependent on the moon. They are not dependent on, cycles of full moon, half moon, any of that. They don't even need it to be nighttime, although they prefer the night. They can do this at will. He is transforming before their very eyes. Now, here they make a decision. They're not going to attack. I ask, what do you do? And the first impulse is, well, let's attack him. But then they say, well, he's still a human being. He hasn't attacked us. We're in his home. We can't just kill him, can we? Well, that momentary indecision, and he attacks. Almost finished to the transformation, he leaps and finishes the transformation mid-air, going from human to this rangy, long, horrid werewolf that leaps across the room and attacks Fofire. He is attacking without weapons, so it's claws and teeth, remembering that if he takes half of her hit points in damage using claws or teeth, she will contract lycanthropy, and within one cycle of the moon, this is the only place where my lycanthropes are tied to the moon, within one cycle of the moon, she will become a werewolf. Also note, according to BECMI rules, if a demi-human is bitten by a lycanthrope and catches the disease, within one cycle of the moon, they die. Okay? So, I have to now track damage in a special way. How much damage is done by lycanthropes using teeth and claws? Remember, the other lycanthrope used an axe sometimes, so they can clearly use weapons. Whether they do, whether they don't, will affect whether they're turning the thing they're attacking into a werewolf. Anyhow, fight breaks out. The only two who could really get involved at this point are Bob Johnny and Fofire, because Touchberry's still on the stairs. It's a small space. Bob Johnny's using an axe, so he doesn't have a full swing available to him, so I give him a penalty to his hit rolls, because he's swinging in a real confined space. Now, Fofire with a sword can jab. She has a lot more flexibility about that way. And eventually, along with some arrow fire from Touchberry, who's able to crouch down because he's small to start with. He's able to crouch down and get underneath the level of the floor. He shoots an arrow or two, and the battle's decided. Werewolf dies. Again, after death, the werewolf slowly begins changing back into a human. As this is happening, they get a good look at the room. They hold the lantern up, they look around. There are bones in the corners. Bones, some of them of animals, some of them of humanoids. Goblin, human, dwarf. The pile of cloth and rags that this creature has as a bed is in fact made out of clothing. Clothing. Some of it would fit a human, may have fit the werewolf himself. Some of it would really only fit a dwarf, and some of it is clearly goblin-made. He is sleeping on a bed of the clothes of his victims. They begin to lose sympathy for the werewolves, just a little bit. As they look around the room, they discover in that pile of rags a small chest. Now, there's not a lot of treasure in here. There's 90-some coins of copper, electrum, that kind of thing. There's also a small statue. Carved out of amber, a small statue of a woman. And it's worth in itself about 100, 150 gold pieces. There's also, I think, a minor gem, like an onyx or something like that. Okay. So, now they're wondering, how many werewolves are there? Was that werewolf we fought part of something? Ho, 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 ho. Now, they had buried the last werewolf they fought once it had transformed back into a human being. They don't bury this one for two reasons. Again, he's clearly enjoying being a werewolf and killing people and then sleeping on their clothes of his dead enemies, right? Two, it's bare rock ledge. They couldn't dig here if they tried. So, on they go up the path. It winds and winds its way around the mountain until it comes to a place where it widens out. And at this point, they can see that this bay in the side of the mountain, this widening of the path, was clearly carved intentionally. It was clearly carved by people or dwarves or whatever, but it was not a natural occurrence. There's no suggestion in the slope of the mountain that this is a natural fold in the rocks or anything like that. It is clearly cut out hard lines, and they can see where the carving ends and the slope of the mountain continues on up. In the midst of this large open space, there is a boulder, a huge chunk of rock sitting there. Now, they can't tell if it fell down off the mountain or if it was left here intentionally as some sort of marker stone or whatnot, but there it sits. And huddled against the mountain wall on the inside of this shelf, there is a low stone building. No windows visible in it at all, and from where they approach, no door either. It looks like it used to have a second story. There are some areas of stone which climb up above the line of its mass, but whatever second story it may have had has collapsed. There are stones, blocks of stone here and there around the base of it. They don't see any entrance, though, but they begin to circle, and on the far side, facing back up in the same direction they're going, facing up the hill, there is a doorway. No door, a doorway. They go around to investigate it more closely. On the inside of this doorway hangs a bearskin, and over the door, painted in red, is it blood? Is painted the sign of Heremod, the Barrow White Wizard. Curious. They light a lantern, because again, there's no windows, and in they go. By the light of their lantern, they see a long, dark, cave-like room. The ceiling is stone, lending a subterranean air to the place. At the other end of the chamber, they see 3 mounds of furs, animal skins, cloths, rags, in the midst of which stands a table with some rough stools gathered around it. Sitting at the table is a woman, dressed in warm but rough clothing. Lying on the table before her, a hand axe, which she grabs and stands up, beginning to heave and pant as she walks slowly toward the characters. Behind her, from the two beds in the corners, rise two men, similarly clothed and panting and heaving. They are in the midst of transformation. Now, this time they have no scruples. They attack. The first thing they do, Fleetwood shoots web at the woman, who's now getting uncomfortably close. He shoots web at the woman, and she is caught, ensnared in a web which extends to the ceiling and the wall and the floor, the web shooting forth from Fleetwood's fingers, just coating her and covering her and snatching her. Now, she has that axe, and she attempts to use it to cut at the web, and the strands that are immediately in front of the axe head do get severed, but she can't get enough swing because her arm is so firmly held. She can't get enough swing to do any more. She's caught. Behind her, the two other men, now turning into werewolves, need to move to the side to come around the right of her so that they can attack. At this point, Bob Johnny wants to cast web on the two of them if he can, to get both of them in one, or at least one of them. Unfortunately, Touchberry chooses this moment to charge into battle, and now, if he gets one of the werewolves, he's inevitably going to get Touchberry as well, and so he settles instead for Magic Missile, which he launches at one of the werewolves. Touchberry enters into combat with one of the werewolves, I think the one that was hit with the Magic Missile, and Fowfire enters into combat with the other. The fighting is fierce, it's back and forth. In the next round, Fleetwood casts Sleep on one of the werewolves, and down it goes. They then gang up on the other free werewolf and kill it. Now, web lasts from 2 to 8 turns. Now, a turn is 10 minutes, so we've got 20 to 80 minutes until the first werewolf, the woman, can get free from this web. They've got a sleeping werewolf that is beginning to transform back into a human being. I just decided that, you know what, when something gets slept as a werewolf, he's going to turn back into a human. They decide they're not going to bother tying up the sleeping werewolf. They pick him up, I mean, there's 4 of them, they can do that, and they heave him into the web that currently has the female werewolf bound up. Remember, it covers a 10 by 10 by 10 area, so there's plenty of web to go around. So they try to get him in good and stuck in there. Now, at first I think, well, I'll roll 2d4 to see how many turns he's stuck in the web, but he's not trying to resist, so I'd have to tack that on to when he wakes up, and frankly, by the time he wakes up, the web spell is going to be wearing off anyhow. This is something they don't think about. This is something they don't really give much consideration to, how long that's going to last, and when she gets out, she can cut him out, and what's going to happen. They figure, sorted, let's go. On their way, though, they first check out the room more carefully. All around here as well, there's bones, including the skulls and bones of humanoids, humans, goblins, dwarves. This has been a very brutal and efficient killing force here in the mountains. On the far end, there is another one of these ladders which leads up to a second floor that used to be. They poke their heads up there, but they don't see anything of particular interest. In the fireplaces, however, which are built into the walls, they do find something. The 2 that are closest to the beds and the tables, they seem to have been used relatively frequently, but the 2 closest to the doors haven't been used forever now. In the back of one of those, they find a leather sack with treasure in it. It's not a lot, it's like 60, 70 copper pieces and a few gems. None of the gems are worth a lot. I think the highest value one is worth 50, but it's a little something. Anyway, they grab that, off they go further up the mountain. Finally, they reach the summit. As they approach the very top, they can see ancient stone walls, the ruins of walls which once ringed the summit of this mountain, which once protected the cap of the mountain. They come up where the path reaches the summit. There used to be a grand gatehouse of some sort, long since fallen into ruin. They can just make out enough to see that it was once a very impressive, imposing gatehouse. And they enter onto the summit. Cut flat, it is ringed by the ruins of these ancient walls, walls that were sturdy, powerfully built. Inside the ring, there are the remains of smaller walls, of perhaps stables, blacksmith shops, workshops, things like that, buildings within the outer wall. Now, they look around, they explore it. I wish I had a map to share with you. I have no idea what happened to it. It is just not among any of the stuff I have from this adventure. But I can explain it to you. It's not complicated. In fact, as they look around, there are really only two features which draw much interest. I mean, the small walls, it's like watching an episode of Time Team or something, and most of it is ruined and covered in snow anyhow. There are tracks, however, and they follow them, and they lead to an opening almost at the center of this circular space, inside of the ruins of an old building, the faint outline of an old building. There is a staircase leading down into the solid rock of the mountain itself. Also on this summit, connected in with the ruins of the surrounding walls, there is a tower, the tower that the elves were able to perceive from a distance. It is tall and thin. It is built of that same strange rock and has endured. It seems to be imbued with some strength against the extraordinary elements up here which have ruined the walls around. It stands tall. At the base of it there is an opening, no door here. If there had been a door, it's long since rotted away. There's actually no evidence of there ever being a door. And at the top, on the top story of it, it looks to be about 5 stories tall, that top story doesn't have solid walls. It is a domed roof supported by columns around, so that at the top it's opened up, and they can just make out the glint of silvery railings around those gaps where the columns are. So now they have to decide, are we going to go down or are we going to go up? And there's kind of a debate that happens. On the one hand, this is what we came for. This tower is clearly the thing. Let's go see the thing, right? They want to go see. And plus they can get a view around, they can see where things are. This is clearly what they're there for. The other argument is if we're up there and something nasty comes out of that hole, then we're trapped up there with no way to get out, right? So they go back and forth. There are no tracks, incidentally, leading to the tower. There's no tracks to the tower at all. That's a little curious, they think, but okay. So what they decide to do is to tackle that tower first.